who've been busy translating, and we've got people who are actors. If you could give a simple one-liner, two-liners, advice is the word, to somebody who's just approaching the task of translating of your plays, what would you tell them?
Well, I'd probably, hello everybody, can you hear me okay? Yes. And I'm sure your English is as good as mine, so I'll stop worrying about that. Congratulations on your performance, thank you very much. That's never happened to me before. And as regards placing bets against very long odds, I think whatever happens with spinning coins in my play, the odds would not have been as long as a bet one might have taken that the words I was writing 50 years ago would be spoken back to me in Skopje in 2015. It's quite astonishing. I'd rather not think about the 50 years that's gone by. But it was a very nice moment for me, and I very much appreciate the work that you prepared with such care for me. Very touched by that. As for giving advice, that's certainly not what is the sign above my shop, you know. Advice is not offered here, but I'm quite sensitive to the subject of translation, partly because the starting point for translation is really rather ambiguous. I myself have had my own attempts to make English versions of, for example, Chekhov on 3 occasions, as well as even Molnar, languages which I don't read. And what I understand about translation is that it's really a metaphysical balance between accuracy and the abandonment of literal accuracy. I very much like the very well-known remark in English that poetry is what is lost in translation, which you all know that. I think that some writers are probably easier to translate than others, and I don't think any of us are actually easy to translate, because conveying the sense of what is written in, for example, in English, is only part of the problem, and in a way the larger part, which truly a translator can do very little about, is that in all works of art there's a secret subtext of allusion. And in a play written in English, and I'm very conscious of it in regard to my own plays, there is an unspoken subtext of allusions which one is counting on the audience picking up, even if it's not particularly self-conscious. And whenever I'm in the situation of having one of my plays rehearsed in a foreign language, I find myself spending more time in illuminating the unwritten sense of a page than in what is written on the page. As you will have understood already, I'm capable of speaking until you all want to go home, just on one question. So I'll try to remember to be more succinct.
So, if there was that advice to the translators, what about the actors?
Well, let me do it. You don't. If I've this is a serious piece of advice to actors. I've done it, so you don't have to do it. You know, if I write a line which is angry, you don't have to be angry when you do it, because I did that for you. This is true of every emotion, and obviously actors want to embody the emotion, because there's no truthfulness without that. But if I have one problem in rehearsal, it is, I hope the actors here understand this, if I have one problem, it is that the actors tend to want to do what I already did for them. Does that make sense to you?
It certainly makes sense. Could you perhaps talk about the pitching and throwing the ball to the audience that I found on the internet? That was a superb continuation of this line of thought.
What ball?
In comedy, pitching it just right so that audiences...
I think I know what you're referring to. You know, I think most writers, I certainly can only speak for myself, but we have two fears, two horrors as well. There are two. One is failure to be explicit, and the other is over-explicitness. I really would find it difficult to tell you which is the bigger problem. But what Goran is referring to is that my feeling is that see what's happening in theatre, what's actually going on, what writing a play can be said to be, is the control of information traveling from the stage to the audience, just controlling that information. And when I say controlling it, I mean controlling the speed at which the information is delivered, so it's not too slow and not too fast for comprehension. It also includes the idea that you withhold some of the information, because if you do all the audience's work for the audience, then that becomes tedious for the audience. So there's a certain incalculable but instinctive place which exists between me, if I'm an actor here, and you. Between us there's a place where the information travels, and if it doesn't reach you quite, then the moment has failed. Then the metabolism of the event misses a beat, like missing a heartbeat, and you have to recover from that. If the sense doesn't quite reach you, if it's not quite comprehensible enough, or if it got to you too quickly and you couldn't recover, like a tennis player not making the shot, that is a problem. The other problem is that I and the actor, we make damn sure it gets to you, and you don't have to move, it just comes straight to you, and you've done nothing except receive it. That is also a way of the event missing its rhythm. And what Goran was referring to is my belief that with a play, there's a certain place where you pitch things in comprehensibility, in audibility, in choice of idiom, in every single way, there's a place where there's an ideal place where you and I do the work together. What he didn't explain, which I must explain to you, is that the place is different for every line. So that's, is my English okay, clear, slow enough? Are you picking this up, generally speaking? How are we doing here? Okay, good. So that's that.
In one of your interviews, you said that when you write a play, you want to get it to a perfect sonnet-like precision. And that sonnet, when it's given to directors and to actors, it's usually changed and tweaked and rebalanced, and that something happens to the sonnet in the meantime. And that I suppose the actors have to make their own sonnet out of the material, going through their own 2 months of working with your sonnet.
This is appalling, you know. The whole internet problem. I have a smartphone, but I have no computer. My wife has a computer, and if necessary, everything reaches me through my wife's computer. The fact, you know, Goran, you have looked me up on some website. I don't have a website, but somewhere you've looked me up because you're saying things which I've forgotten.
Yes.
But I remember now you say it. So,
well, we have to remember certain things that you've forgotten. One of the questions which I asked you in London is what happens when your kind of intellect, which is frightening, suddenly starts forgetting things. and you said, are you asking me this on an artistic level or on a personal level? Well, both. And then you said that you're perfectly fine working on an artistic level. There's no problem about it at all. You're slightly slower than usual. And then there was one private moment which I didn't see online anywhere. You showed me the pen that you write with. You've never been anywhere near computer for writing, is that correct?
I correct on printout, but I write with a pen. You mentioned, the word I picked up from you was the word sonnet.
Yes.
And I know everything implied by your use of that word. But, you know, the success of this encounter between us depends on none of you actually looking me up in any way. Otherwise, I feel like a comedian whose jokes have all been heard before. Essentially, what I was saying was that when you're sitting there writing, the actual act of writing, that act is completely self-sufficient. It's as self-sufficient as, and this is why I know where this came from, as if you were writing a sonnet. A sonnet, okay? When you finish your play, then something really remarkable happens. The opposite happens. When you're actually trying to make the journey from the text to the event, you become completely obsessed with things which are not on the page at all. You become obsessed with things which cannot be on the page. You know, on the page it might say pause. You're obsessed with the pause being too short or too long. It might say on the page, you know, I don't know, the clock chimes, and you think, no, that's the wrong kind of clock, for heaven's sake. That's not what I meant at all. I meant this kind of clock chimes. So you become completely sort of fixated on almost like the concrete expression of what a few months earlier you were perfectly happy to live with in this abstract metaphysical world of pen, paper, brain, nothing else. But that was what that was.
Some of your early farces, like After Magritte or the Real Expector Hound, they could be episodes of Monty Python Flying Circus without any change. The just could be directed by Cleese and company. You worked with Terry Gilliam on Brazil. Could you tell us something about the resonances of that particular humor, that particular kind of absurd farce and...
Yeah, I mean, you know, I'm trying to remember the order of events. I mean, there was suddenly a lot of young British people doing comedy from university and after university, and it began before Monty Python too. I've never actually thought about my own work in that context, but yes, I mean, I loved it, so enough said. I mean,
but you started before them in a way. I think you started before they did, because they took off in 1970, 1971, and you'd done your stuff in 68, basically.
I started writing in 1960, apart from being on a newspaper. The whole subject of what makes people laugh in which society and in which period and why, it's too deep for philosophy, as Hamlet might say. It is just so deep. Where do you begin to get an explanation of what accounts for something being funny at a particular time and not later? There's an enormous amount of comedy in the background of my life, which is completely dated now, things which I absolutely adored. They don't seem particularly inspired anymore. I'm not going to go on too far about this because it's not something I've ever considered, actually, my relationship to those comedies, except that I really loved them.
But Terry Gilliam must have recognized and known all of these things.
I'm sure he would deny that.
What year was Brazil?
Brazil must have been around 1980, I should think.
Yes.
I saw him the other day, still around, looking great, and being himself. And Brazil is always finding new audience, which he was telling me about it, actually. We were speaking about it just last week. Now, so just tell me again, we have students of drama, students of English, and I think you said philology? No, translation.
Well, the English department at the Faculty of Philology. But I'm sure we've got some other friends and colleagues from other walks of life and students from I suppose, who come to these events at Makatsar. Anyway, only 10 days ago, we had the last performance of the Mott Festival, is that right? Somebody who told me that she was going to come to this festival was Natalia Kolyada from Belarus, who has a theater called the Belarus Free Theater. Did anybody see that production in this room?
Yep.
How many people?
A few people did. Yeah.
Because Natalia Kolyada is, of course, somebody that Sir Tom Stoppard helped a lot, because he extended his invitation to them to come to London. It would be, because when we met in London, Sir Tom said that he'd heard from Natalia that he sent
I mean, this is a exiled theatre company who can't really work in Belarus. They're in exile. I mean, I just met them 10 years ago in Minsk, and I tried to stay friends for as long as possible and give them help when I could, but a lot of other people helped them too. And I got a message from Natalia saying, we're in Skopje, and I believe that they were performing in this space, weren't they?
They were. And at lunch, Sir Tom asked me, if I knew how the performance went. And since I don't know, will some of you please, after the show, after the event, tell him how it went, because he will want to know.
Yeah.
I would like to quote a sentence from a New Statements interview which I read recently. Plays are story forms which one can draw huge lessons from, but they aren't the lesson. I think that's always been true from antiquity. And you also mentioned that when it comes to changing society, when it comes to dealing with politics, political columns in newspapers can be useful as, in fact, you put it, if you want to change the world by Tuesday, you can perhaps try it with a political column. But you also say that the theatre has a more lasting half-life, more lasting effect for making changes in human consciousness. Could you, yeah.
No, well, first of all, I want to correct a detail. I don't mean a political column. That's not what I was talking about. I'm talking about reporters, reporting.
Journalists, okay.
Journalism. I mean, I began life as a reporter, and I worked on newspapers, not in a big way, but in Bristol, in the West Region in England. I was on a couple of daily papers, and then I was freelancing. And I really, until I was, I don't know, 22 or 3, I really just wanted to be a journalist. I loved journalism. I just adored it. And I hero worshipped certain almost mythological foreign correspondents working for British and American papers and so on. And I always felt that there were very few things as important as just being there at the time something is happening and reporting it or taking a photograph of it. Photojournalism, I think, has changed consciences in ways which theatre rarely manages to do. You know, I know one or two people, photographers, who worked in war zones, and certain images which are just grabbed for newspaper readership or television audience just for that day. They are capable of, you've always seen photographs from the Vietnam War, for example. But when you come to compare it with, and I don't know there's any real point in trying to make such comparisons, but you know, if you wish to compare it with a play which breaks new ground socially, you know, you can talk about Ibsen, for example, where there are various kind of, there are modernist plays from 100 years ago whose subtexts were everything from sexuality or venereal disease or madness and different kinds of insanity. All kinds of subjects were being explored in plays deeply. And I do actually believe, and this is, I think, why one should be as proud of being somebody working in the theatre as somebody working in journalism. I think that in a very important way, our moral sensibilities are shaped by art in its highest form, whether we're talking about painters or composers or dramatists, novelists. I believe that they alter the way we conceive of the world. And yesterday, when I was talking to a small group of people very briefly, just to say thank you to my hosts, I remembered something I'd always said for years and years, which is that it seemed to me that all political issues resolve themselves into moral issues when one pursues them far enough. So something which is capable of shaping one's moral responses is probably as important as the philosophy, which attempts to do that overtly. The thing about theatre, for me, is that it works as metaphor. So my plays don't really declare what they are about. And in fact, it would be very limiting to try to declare what they're about. Rosencrantz and Guildenstern are dead. I feel that the author of that play must write it in the belief, as it were, that its subject matter is the experience of two courtiers at Elsinore during the reign of Claudius. That is the mise en scène. When it's in performance, all manner of applications might come from the experience of watching the play, but they are all valid. That's the point. It's not like there's a correct answer to what the play is trying to say. Every subjective response has its own authenticity. Is that clear? That's why I hope I'm making myself...
However, there are some other plays, like the TV play Professional Foul, which has got a much more laser-like sharpness of politics. In a TV play that Sir Tom wrote in 1977, there is a professor of, indeed, moral philosophy. There are quite a few of those characters in your play, from Cambridge, who goes to Prague. He's supposed to give a paper at a conference. Suddenly, in the hotel, a young ex-student of his approaches him and says, "You're my old professor. I'm a dissident now in Czechoslovakia. Will you please take my manuscript to the West?" The man is faced with a serious moral dilemma that he solves in a very decent moral way. That play is on YouTube, and I know that it's not particularly exciting to mention YouTube in the presence of Sir Tom. Please do use it. You can see quite a number of his films, including Rosencrantz and Guildenstern, that he directed in Slovenia and Croatia, in ex-Yugoslavia.
You know, in this play about the professor in Prague, he is asked to smuggle, so a dissident guy asked, but what you didn't mention is that he succeeds in smuggling it out.
By putting it in someone else's suitcase.
By cheating on somebody else and putting it in somebody else's briefcase, so if they're caught, it's him, not me. I mean, it's not that straightforward, the morality.
And of course the conversation happens in a lobby because the rooms are bugged. I am fully aware that there are students here who had their questions prepared. So let's go for those, please.
Yes. Yeah, please, just, you know, I beg you, just relax. I don't care what you want to know about. If you want to know the brand of my fountain pen, I'm very happy to say that. If you want to know metaphysics, we can try to talk about anything. It's fine.
One thing you can find on YouTube before the questions is his choice of music. There is a special, very popular radio series in Britain called Desert Island Discs, which you can find recorded, and his top 10 choices are there. Buyurun.
I have two questions. The first one being that you said that you wanted to be a journalist when you were younger. What's your take on the work that Methodius has been doing
My take on what?
On the work that WikiLeaks has been doing.
WikiLeaks.
Yeah. So big one.
Well, we're all in favor of transparency. WikiLeaks is an odd one because it's, in theory, self-correcting. But as I understand it, it's not. I think you're asking me about whether I approve of.
Not necessarily if you approve or not, but what's your take on like, how do you view the tables that were released? Do you think that they are helping the world or causing confusion?
No, it's a deep question.
Are the leaks helpful is what you're asking, yes?
Sorry?
Are the leaks helpful is your question?
Or are they causing confusion?
They're obviously, they're both. I mean, I think there's no point in having diplomatic channels if they are leaked. I mean, you can't, as it were, we might as well abandon the whole principle of statesmen and nations trying to address problems, as it were, quietly, and in a sense more honestly, because people are inclined to speak more honestly when they feel their words are being treated with confidence. If you can't rely on confidentiality, that's on the whole not a good thing, because then people are not quite as open with their minds as they would be, as they might be. But as I said at the beginning, you know, we all love transparency. We don't like political and social life being concealed from us by people with the power to conceal it naturally. It's each to its case. I mean, I think I could give you a more distinct answer if there was a more distinct question, as it were. As a general principle, I distrust both answers, to be honest. To say, you know, the more the better as a general principle leads you into areas where you really wouldn't consciously wish to go, and conversely to say, no, you know, disapprove of all of it, then I think you're also, as it were, denying yourself certain benefits. I don't like, at some level, you know, one is trying to kind of get to a place which really is the sort of bottom of the question. So you go down there and try and find it here. And what I don't trust is the very idea of somebody else telling me what's good for me and doing so secretly, as it were, knowing what's good for me and acting upon that in secret. Who could ever like that?
Anybody else? Quite a few of you.
I just want to say that it's truly a privilege having you here. My heart is racing, and I hope I will make sense. I'm going to touch upon what we have already started talking about. My question is, what is the role of the artist, or the writer for that matter? What is the role when the political stability has been compromised? Are they allowed to express their opinions?
Are they allowed to?
To express themselves and their ideas?
Well, can I just sort of clear something out of the way first? there are many times and many places where one should ask about political and social theatre as subjects for plays. If I start talking about that straight away, I'll lose sight of something which I think is very important, at least it is to me, which is that I think the theatre is a recreation. I don't know whether, in English, it doesn't exactly just mean to recreate something. In English, a recreation is a relaxation, a pastime.
We got the same word. Yeah.
So I absolutely believe in the importance of the culture being a society's recreation. I don't think the culture exists in order to, as it were, editorialize for society, to promulgate, to sell, to deny, to, you know what I mean? It has all kinds of possible functions, and that's really what your question is about. But I just want to lay down the thing that we shouldn't forget, that, I don't know, who can I say? Buster Keaton is not a political animal. Charlie Chaplin, when he tries to be a political animal, he gets a bit embarrassing. It's when he's just being a tramp comedian that he's a genius.
Yeah, but he did The Great Dictator, which was both.
I thought it was actually, it's a good point, but not as good as...
But talking about points, will you please pick up the books which Tabernacle has just published? Because in it, you will find 125 answers to your question, because the humble answer that Sir Tom just given you is actually not exactly the whole truth, because in the place Coast of Utopia, he is digging very deep in answers to your questions, in the radical Russian thinkers of Bielinski, Herzen, and Bakunin.
But that doesn't contradict what I said.
No,
what I'm saying is that to change minds is a play's right. It's not its obligation.
Yeah, good. Yeah.
I work in a country, even now, with various curtailments of individual liberties on the grounds of a higher imperative to do with geophysical security, to do with security. In the age of terrorism, we've had taken from us, or we've given up various parts of what used to be our freedom. But even so, I live and work in a place where I can actually move around. Nobody tells me what I can read or can't read. Essentially, it is a liberal, it's not utopia, but it's a liberal society. We were talking about the Belarus Free Theatre. When I went to Minsk in 2005, when I first met these people who were, as it were, persecuted by, they weren't allowed to work in their national theatre, and everything was the state. There was nothing else, no other kind of theatre. And so I was involved in a kind of seminar, secret seminar. We all had to go to the countryside to get away from microphones. It was all, I didn't know whether to take it seriously or not. But anyway, we ended up having this seminar, and there were sort of young writers there, a lot of people, maybe at least a dozen young writers and other people. And I was making, and I was saying, they were telling me about their situation and the plays which they were trying to write, and in fact, the whole affair was to do with a competition for playwrights best new play, best first play, whatever. And I sat in this place, the visitor from overseas, and so on. And I said, well, yeah, of course. What I said was that you don't get any points, credits for your choice of subject matter in art. I'll tell you before I finish that I ended up being very ashamed of what I said, but I'm telling you anyway. I sat there and I said that, yeah, the thing about the difference between art and journalism, if you like, is that you get no extra credit by your choice of topic. Art is about something else. It's about doing something very, very well, which might be done badly by somebody else. It's about transcending the literalness of life, and so on and so on. You can imagine. And there's this guy there, a very young guy who'd written a play, and he said, well, what did he say exactly? He said 7 of the people he was at school with were dead. This is a guy who's about 22 years old. They were died from drug overdose or something violent or horrible. And he also spoke about his family and how his family, his mother particularly, I remember, how they lived and so on. And of course, I could see too late that subject matter was everything for him. That's what else is there to write about but that? And what, artistic quality? I mean, I would like to use a 4-letter word here, He's thinking, fuck that, I mean, Jesus. So, what I'm trying to say to you is that there is no absolute wisdom here. It depends where one is sitting. It depends where one is living.
One other play which is published in Tabernacle is called Rock and Roll, which is very much around these moral choices. And one of the characters says, how to live in truth in a society which lies to itself. Great play. Have a look at that. Next time you come here, we will be giving you a bit of that performance.
Something really funny happened about this morning. Can I just ask you a question? Who's filming me and so on?
I think we asked the Faculty of Dramatic Arts to give us a film recording of this.
It's for
academic use.
Yeah, I'm not concerned. I was just curious.
Yeah. Well, I would be concerned had I not known.
I don't know. I don't even know that this is worth telling you. It sounds conceited now that I think about it. But this morning, as a former journalist, I read 2 papers every single day of my life, and if I'm here, I read them on Kindle. I mean, it's like a kind of
digital
oxygen for me. Yeah, my wife has the Kindle. So I'm looking at The Guardian, today's Guardian, on this little machine. I will start the sentence at a different place. Many years ago, in 1972, like 40 years ago, in a play, I wrote a character saying, there was an election outside the windows and so on. This character in this play, he says, it's not the voting that's democracy, it's the counting.
Yeah.
So, and today in The Guardian, they're writing about Belarus and the presidential election.
He won again, 5th time.
Yeah, he got 83% of the vote. Okay, and this newspaper said, but of course, it's not the voting that's democracy, it's the counting, as Stalin said. Well, he sure didn't steal it from me, because that was 1972, and I don't think I stole it from him. Anyway, so that's it. That was just a digression.
Great minds think alike.
Somebody hand up there, look.
Yeah, go on.
Yes. Speak up. You have said that for you, theater is not merely a text.
Hold on a second for Mike.
You have said that for you, theater is not merely a text, but rather an event. And you also have worked for films, so you have adapted certain works into movies. Do you think that any prose work, for example, any novel or any play could be adapted into a film, or even a play as it's a novel? And do you think that maybe there are conditions that a certain work has to kind of meet in order to be able to be successfully adapted into a film?
Right. Can you encapsulate? I'm slightly deaf, so forgive me for
It's a
that.
relationship between other works of art and adaptation into drama. Is that right?
Yeah. So
it's
is
a question
is it
of,
possible to adapt any type of prose work
is
or
everything
any prose
adaptable
work
for the
into a
stage
film?
or for the screen?
Right. I had a very exciting and pleasurable hour this morning at the National Theatre, where they are attempting to put the Master and Margarita onto the stage. I was fascinated because twice in my life, I think 25 years ago and probably 15 years ago, I was asked to do the Master and Margarita. Somebody asked me if I would adapt it, and I didn't know how to do it. I tried, and so on. So, yes, anything can be, but the whole transaction between the original work and the resultant work is unique unto itself. I think that very often you can't, as it were, transport something from one medium into another and hope to have everything still intact when you arrive. But that doesn't matter. You can choose to actually deal with one aspect of it. I think film, one could talk about film for a long time, because here's a question for you. You don't have to answer it, but why is it so difficult to make a good film out of a good book? Very often it's possible to make a good film out of a mediocre book. That's an interesting thought. In other words, there's something deeply creative and destructive about the act of adaptation. Because the source material guarantees nothing. And that's true in our world of the theatre. Nothing, this is why I love to talk about the theatre as an event. It's because the text guarantees nothing. If the text guaranteed something, you'd never see a duff production of Shakespeare. You'd never see bad Shakespeare if the text guaranteed the event. And this is why I feel, one tries to think modestly and act modestly. But this is why I think that actors and directors and scenic designers and sound designers, and not least writers as well, are absolutely essential to the body of art having warm blood flowing through it, that is actually alive and not dead. These are the shamans and medicine men and magicians who have to make this transfiguration from the page to the event, and nothing is guaranteed. So be proud.
I think he asked the question, are there any killer answers in the room? Maya.
Even if you haven't heard a word about our political situation, you could have guessed that it's not very, let's be nice, pinky or nice now in Macedonia. And my question is connected with the political engaged theater and your work in it. You said that art is about changing minds directly through the subject, through the theme, or indirectly through the form. In your first period, you were accused of being apolitical. And it is the period where you were building, let's say, your poetic, called Stoppardianism after that by the theoreticians. What do you think, when you were more influential, or with your poetic from the first period, or later with your plays where you were openly, let's say, politically engaged in changing minds?
Yeah, no, I heard everything you said except the actual question. I mean,
the question is, do you think that you're more influential with your
more influential?
form?
Is
Yeah,
that?
with your form?
Were your farces more politically influential than your political work?
Well, I don't even think of anything I'm doing as being particularly influential. I don't really understand the idea of influentiality. When I arrived in England, by accident, when I was 8 years old, and 10 years later, I was starting to go to the theatre, and 15 years later, I was writing my first play. And I was a Czech refugee who was turned into an English schoolboy and then an English writer. And the last thing I felt inclined to do was to complain about this place where I had arrived, because otherwise I would have been in Czechoslovakia in 1950, And for the first few years where I was a sort of conscious, I was in no way an intellectual. I was just somebody who kind of, read stuff. I was just made angry by everything happening around me in England. I'm now talking about the 1960s, probably. I started writing a play in 1960, yeah. I was just sort of made rather angry by the fact that all around me, my contemporaries were writing loudly, if you understand me, about bourgeois censorship, about the bourgeois values of our government and how they were being censored. And I thought, this is absurd. Nobody seems to understand the meaning of the word censorship. It was as though I had to kind of, use my knowledge of the English language to correct people who were English. So I would be saying, no, censorship isn't a case of somebody not agreeing with you. Censorship is when I stop a third party from writing or publishing. It requires an exertion onto somebody who is not yourself. Anyway, so I got a reputation for being, in those terms, rather a right-wing conservative person. And the truth of the matter is, I am a conservative person. I think of myself as philosophically conservative, intellectually conservative. I've always felt that I mean, clearly everybody needs radical moments, but I've always felt temperamentally conservative. And I think when you say influential, I didn't feel influential in either period. And this is really kind of what I started off actually distrusting the whole notion of a play having an obligation to comment and tell other people what they should be thinking or doing. I distrusted that principle. I was very if you take a play like The Importance of Being Earnest, we'll choose a play everybody knows. It's like a kind of, it is like a sort of perfect artifact. Now, Oscar Wilde actually was quite a political animal when you come to read his essays. However witty they are examples of an intellect engaging with politics, not in the narrow sense of the word of, who's in government and so on, but engaging in politics. But for me, those essays, they were, quite valuable, interesting, and worth reading, and I was glad that they were available and published and so on. But the play, The Importance of Being Earnest, that was something on a totally different level of inspiration. It was like a kind of perfect comedy. So I've always felt self-consciously like someone keeping his balance between theatre as recreation and theatre as the game changer, the world changer. Nobody in my language has got to where Shakespeare got to. And
I'm a big professor of English literature.
What?
Yeah, sorry.
No, it's just that how absolutely magnificent it is to have a body of, work, so roughly 30 dramas, comedies and tragedies, which can be explored in order to investigate or announce absolutely anything, human nature. It's as though it's like having a reminder that everything we are about has its residual foundation in the mystery of human nature. And the moment one takes a step to one side in order to, as it were, exploit human nature, to make a point, to manipulate, then you've just lost that direct contact with the deepest springs in yourself. God, I hate the sound of my voice sometimes. I'm making this up as I go along, and I don't know what I feel about it.
There is,
if I've said the same thing tomorrow.
There is one brilliant play called The Real Thing, in which one very politically committed guy is unable to write a play. All he can write is propaganda. Any further questions, please?
Thank you. You mentioned before the context of this sort of immediacy kicking in, for example, the clock chiming, even when the work in progress is still going on between the author and the pen and the paper. And seeing as, according to me at least, playwriting is the one effort that is, the one authorial effort that is collaborative and not really solitary, what are the challenges of playwriting? What are the challenges that you as a playwright face when your play comes into the sort of this whirlpool of being realized and actualized for the audience to see?
Well, you know, I did touch upon this earlier. You're right. It's a team sport, and my personal experience was that from having my first play performed to having my last play performed, I underwent an education. And I think that, I think I got pretty educated between the first play and the second play. Because before I had any plays being performed, I had a feeling, I had the kind of assumption, without examining it, that the job of the theatre company, the actors, the director, everybody involved, that their job was to take the text and just express it in their own concrete reality, not to question it or to do anything, but try to ascertain what the author had in mind and do that. I had the idiotic feeling, I had the idiotic notion that because every line in the play made a very particular kind of noise while I was writing it, you know, if I wrote a line here, you know, darling, I love you, it makes a certain kind of noise where the stress is, the volume of it. And I had this idiotic feeling when I was young that the task of the actor was to figure out what noise was in my head and reproduce it. You know, a robot could have done that maybe. And I had no sense at all, because I've never worked in theatre. I came out of newspapers into having a play done. I had no sense at all that that the way actors worked was to, as it were, produce that noise through a process which came from inside them, and whatever came out had to be truthful, and the only way it could be truthful would be if they themselves processed the emotions and then the noise happened. It took me a while to understand this, and to my shame, to this day, I feel an impatience in myself as I can feel a rehearsal going in the wrong direction. And so at the back of me is my 21-year-old Tom Stoppard saying, look, just make the noise, it'll be fine, you know. Don't bump into the furniture and make the noise. It's pathetic. So I actually am now in great awe of actors. I'm intimidated by actors. I'm actually a bit frightened of actors. And I also have the sense that they can all do absolutely anything whenever they want to do it. And once, a few years ago, I was having a problem in rehearsal. I wasn't directing it, I was just sitting there trying to help. And this guy, he just seemed arrogant, and he kept sort of doing stuff. He tried different things without accommodating the other actors. And anyway, I sort of, finally I said, look, you mustn't be like this. It's kind of not right. You have to. And he turned around and he said, don't you understand? I'm terrified. And I said, no, I didn't know that. You what? He said, I am terrified. And I said, oh my God, I'm sorry, I had no idea. To me, actors are never terrified. They're just brilliant.
Thank you very much.
I wanted to touch upon the thing that here in Macedonia, let's say if you're a writer, any kind, there's a sort of tug of war inside of you that you have to make it outside of Macedonia. Like, if you don't get recognized by the English-speaking world, your work is nothing, essentially. There's this sort of expectation that if you're actually good, you're going to make it out there, because things here don't matter. I mean, you made it in Macedonia, big deal. And I wanted to ask you how you felt about this sort of tug of war that happens sometimes with authors who aren't necessarily part of countries that are considered Western or English-speaking. Like, how can you reflect your identity in a way that you're not abandoning it, but you're still kind of taking the best out of the English parts and the best of Shakespeare and all the other authors that the English-speaking world offers, but still kind of being true to what you know and you know your home. Like, I realize that you were raised in England, but you know, you still have, you know, traces of like the place where you were born, you know, it doesn't go away. Like, how do you feel about things like that, like merging identities or keeping them, or, you know?
It's really hard to put myself. Are you a writer?
Well,
yeah.
Maybe. We'll see.
But I know what you're talking about. You know, the thing you're describing to the topography of the kind of trees that there were. It was as though I had very deep English roots. I can't explain it. And when I actually ended up, grown up, visiting Czechoslovakia, I'm afraid I didn't feel what you were describing. I just felt I was in an interesting foreign country, sadly. I think I just left too early. But are you saying, I'm not sure if you're saying this, but are you saying that if you have a success in your own language, you somehow feel it's limited because it's only in your own language?
Well, not in your own language, but essentially here the view is like that, because we're a small country. And you know, you read Shakespeare and you're like, oh, he's from England.
Oh, yeah.
Or you read another playwright,
yeah.
oh, he's from England.
Yeah.
Or he's from America and some other countries, and people don't even know where Macedonia is, and you're like, well, you're a dramatist in Macedonia. And like, even if you're proud, even if you reach every level here in Macedonia,
yeah.
It's like, not, you know, you don't feel like you're doing the best, because if you're the best, you'll leave, because people, you know, like, you'll leave and be a big name, and when you come back, it's like, oh, he made it in England, you know, he went to school there, because if you finish drama school there, it's somehow more than drama school here, but the quality maybe isn't different, but it's like the name, because drama and all the other things, you know, in most countries, like the best of the best literature is English speaking. You know, you won't find Grigor Kudlichev there, but he's, like, to us, he's the best and he deserves to be on those lists, but,
I completely get what you're saying. I totally get this. I mean, you know, it's not exactly a question, and I don't exactly have an answer, but it's a completely familiar thing that you're expressing.
This is all brilliantly analyzed in post-colonial theories by Edward Said. So go into that. But I went just a little sub. I'm sorry. No, but there is one thing two things I would like to say, although I haven't been asked. But I went to Toronto many years ago for a theatre conference, and somebody gave me a book of Canadian dramatists with little photographs, little sujets of the plays they've been writing, 250 of them. I've never heard of any of those. And you think to yourself, Goran, why do you expect that, you know, one of your plays is going to go there when none of theirs has that? And also, let's also remember that this genius guy here was only staged, which I think is criminal, once in our language, thanks to Zlatko, our colleague from, and to Rainer. So, do you know what I'm saying? There's one thing, and well, actually, that's the only thing.
Well, thank you very much once again for accepting our offer. Now, as they would say in Monty Python, and now something completely different. You did mention Shakespeare. I've noticed that in a number of your plays, you employ this dramatic convention, which is characteristic of English Renaissance drama, and that is a play within a play, like in The Real Inspector Hound and Arcadia, etc. Could you please tell us some more what inspired you, what inspires you or motivated you to employ it as a theatrical drama device?
You know, it doesn't feel to me like a decision I made at any point, and consequently it doesn't feel to me like I had reasons for any decision I might have made. You know...
Would you agree that it is there?
What? Do I agree it's there? What, the...
Do you agree that it's...
The play...
There are plays within plays, you know?
Yeah.
This kind of interpretation, would you agree with it?
It's never occurred to me I've never actually thought about this. How many times did I do this? The real thing.
Arcadia, The Real Inspector.
Wait a minute. Is there a play in Arcadia?
Not literally, but in the sense that two time periods are...
Oh, two time periods, yeah. That's different.
Well, you did it in The Real.
And they do mix.
I can think
at one point they do overlap.
Well, I can think of The Real Thing, and I can think of The Real Inspector Hound. I think the way to deal with the question is to try to kind of be honest about the process of creativity as I see it.
Okay.
It is not remotely as self-aware as it would have to be in order for me to give you a coherent response to your question. It's just not remotely self-aware enough. I think long ago I operated from the idea that I needed to know almost everything about a play before I could even begin writing the first line. And I quite quickly began to understand that the more you think you know about the whole play, and therefore the more you have to, as it were, make it conform to this preconception, the less organic it is. And you end up with one of those plays which are really rather kind of brittle. Is that a good word? Brittle, easy to break. And you know the kind of, it's also to do with the whole process of making theatre. You know, we've all, you know, the kind of theatre sometimes where the best performance you ever give is the first one, and after that everything starts breaking down. This is the sure sign of rehearsals which are wrong, which it hasn't been rehearsed in the right way. You know, when the aim, the ambition is to make theatre which gets better every night. It can take it can bend, it can absorb, it can actually adjust to meet its new environment every night. That's the ideal. And with plays, something rather similar occurs. If you, and this is now my credo, actually, that if you just start knowing almost nothing and just pray, cross your fingers, just see where it goes and see where it wishes to go. If things go well, you end up with a text which is, as it were, honest with itself. It's a text which you haven't been sort of going to make it go this way, or I like to make it fit this framework. If you just have no preconceptions about what might happen to this text, where it might go, how it might go, if you find that as you write it, you're constantly changing your mind, who comes in, who matters, what kind of person this is going to be. If you're constantly changing your mind as you go, I think that's a really good sign. I think that's a really good sign. If you never have to change your mind about anything, that's not a good sign. That's what I think.
You've been very generous with your time. Thank you very much. I'd stay here all night. Any further questions, please?
I would like to ask 2 questions, hopefully short. Is there a play by another author? Is there a play by another author that you admire so much that you would wish that you'd have written yourself? And in one interview I saw you were asked to sum up Hamlet in 1 word. You summed it up with if.
Very good.
Could you do the same for Rosencrantz and Guiller's and Odette, perhaps?
The second question was, once you said that Hamlet could be reduced, if you had to reduce it to 1 word, it would be if. That's a very good question.
I said that?
We must have been cheated by the same source. Yes, you did, and this was in Sydney, and it was only 3 or 4 years ago, and we will hold it against you. And it was so brilliant that you better remember it.
Yeah, it was a very good answer.
You said that if you could reduce Hamlet to 1 word, it could be the word if.
Yes, you were asked.
No, that's really nice. What did you say?
Sorry, what was the answer?
The whole context of the question was a person asked you whether you had finished a shorter version of Hamlet, a 15-page version of Hamlet, and they asked you to sum it up in 1 word. So I would like to ask you to do the same for Rosencrantz and Guiller's and Odette, if you could. And the other question was, is there a play by another author, dead or alive, that you admire so much that you wish you'd have written yourself? Thank you.
I know this one because I've heard it on the internet.
You know the answer. Well, I'm glad somebody does. What is the answer?
The answer was the following. Somebody was asking him, what other playwright do you admire? And there was a very interesting dramatic pause. And then you very diplomatically said, Pinter. After which you said, there are some other people which I won't mention because they're my friends. We don't need you here, we know you.
Well, I wasn't being diplomatic, actually. The fact is, there are lots of plays I wish I'd written which I didn't write, and I think probably Harold wrote about 3 of them, at least. That was not diplomatic. I mentioned, actually, didn't I, the importance of being earnest. I'd be quite pleased to have written that. Of Shakespeare, I love A Winter's Tale because it's, you know, it doesn't have the wonderful philosophical speeches of Hamlet, for example. It doesn't have the tragic pathos of Lear. But it has things which, to me, are the true mark of genius, which is a kind of strange ability to ignore obstacles. You know, summed up actually by the seacoast of Bohemia. Oh, you mean there's no seacoast? Who cares? You know, there's never been a play that does this. What do you mean she's asleep for so long and she comes? Yeah, why not? Who cares? I love this thing in The Winter's Tale where this is the story. It's also 2 stories jammed together, and you think, well, this can't work. And because the man's a genius and says, really? Why not? So that's one. I don't know, you know, I'm glad you said plays, because there are lots of plays I would wish to write. And I'm sure this could be said of me too. There are lots of plays I wish I had written myself. At the same time, they have been written by other authors who have also written plays I really don't want to write. Plays which I don't actually understand or admire. So it's not sort of, it's more complicated than having favorite authors and everything they did was great, and having authors that you don't rate and everything they did was no good. It doesn't work like that. Not entirely.
I'll give you a secret. There is another thing available on YouTube that Sir Tom alerted me to 2 weeks ago. All of the Dark Side of the Moon by Pink Floyd is turned into a play. Check that one out on Google.
It's a radio play I did, yeah, 2 years ago. Who is actually working on a play at the moment here in this room? We have acting students, don't we?
Mimi, what are you doing in the first year with your actors?
We are doing, I did some sensations, some working with physical actions, not with text, unfortunately.
Mimi herself is a Chekhovian, very famous actress here in Macedonia. One of our definitely best.
Is Chekhov performed here quite a lot?
I have remember here Chekhov, Cyril, and
You translated.
No, she was in it.
You acted. Did you do Chekhov?
No.
But
in English writers.
Uh-huh.
And mostly English and American.
In the 30 years ago, I guess Chekhov was done in Russian, but now it's done in Macedonian. In Yugoslavia, was it done in Russian?
Oh no, nothing to do.
And now, do you have good Macedonian Chekhov text?
Chekhov has been a staple. Chekhov has been a staple diet of Macedonian theatre for many years.
Yes.
So but I mean, it's never enough, because one thing which we don't have in this country, I would like to argue, is what you certainly have a lot of in Great Britain. We don't have versions of Chekhov. I mean, a major playwright takes Chekhov and does it for the stage. That is something that would be very exciting to do, I think. No, it's just something that dramaturgs could do. I can see my colleagues who are in the playwriting. Nase, you owe us a quick question. a colleague.
I'm amazed by those prisons.
Yeah. So are we all. Yes.
Can I ask one more question, if I'm not too annoyed? It's about that something has been bothering me. My question is it easier to adapt an already written text, let's say taking Shakespeare's text and transforming it into Rosencrantz or that, or writing something completely new, if that's possible?
Well, that's a sort of strange distinction because Rosencrantz and Guildenstern Are Dead is not actually rewriting Shakespeare. So, I mean, I could understand your question more easily if you were comparing, which happens, very much in theatre, not so much in England, but more abroad, where you turn a novel into a drama. That happens so often, very much in the Russian theatre where I was working a few times. I don't know, what is your name?
My name is Nico.
Nico?
Nicola, yes.
Nicola. The thing is, what I'm trying to say, Nicola, is that I have no self-analytical view of the process. So I often, I think, might appear to be evading a question when actually I don't know what to do with it because I'm coming from a different place. In Coast of Utopia, there's Belinsky's a real-life 19th century critic, and he's explaining. I love Belinsky. He died young, and I adored Belinsky because. He was allowed outside 1838 or some such time, was it? Yeah, probably it was a little later, 1840. Anyway, he was allowed out because he had TB and he was allowed to go to a sanatorium in Germany. And by that time in Paris, he went to Paris, and by that time there were many Russians in Paris, Russian radicals who got away from the shadow of Tsar Nicholas. And people were saying to him, for God's sake, don't go home. Don't go home. The secret police have got you on their list to be arrested. And here in Paris, you can publish anything you like and everybody will read it. And at home, you can do almost nothing. And he went back home, and before he could be arrested, he was dead. But what he explained was that, that in Paris, where everybody could publish everything, there was so much noise going on that nobody actually read anybody. Nobody read anything in the same way. Whereas back in Moscow and St. Petersburg, if he had an essay to be published in the next thick journal, the students would be asking for it quietly a week before it came out in the coffee house, and then when it came out, they'd be sharing one copy and talking about it in whispers with candlelight. And so he felt that, in a strange, paradoxical sense, political suppression gave the artistic voice an extraordinary power, a secret power. This isn't what I wanted to tell you about Belinsky. I wanted to tell you something else, which is what I believe too. He explained that he himself was not an artist. He tried to write a play once, it was no good. He said, I'm not poet, he said, when a poet, you can watch a poet writing a poem. He's sitting there at his table, he's got his pen, and it stops moving. And then it moves again. And he says, where did he go in that moment? Because that's where the poem comes from. You know, where you go somewhere and you don't even know you've gone there, and somebody watching you, all they see is that it stops and then it starts. Where did he go in that moment? That is the question to ask the author of any piece of work which you have cause to admire, like the Robbery. Where did she go in that moment?
And when I asked you this question, this very question 2 weeks ago, you said you're not analytical, you can't answer it.
Well, there you are. I don't
There you go. Could we have 1 or 2 killer questions and that's it? We're closing shop.
Killer questions.
Ognen, take it away.
I don't know if it's a killer.
Ognen is a brilliant translator who's done Moby Dick. He's a killer translator.
Okay, I shall shout because I don't have a mic. 1, 2, 3. Okay, so my question is, because you spoke about actors and how you were frightened of them and how they were frightened of you. But translators go through a very creative process themselves, and often they are frightened by the author or by the work. Now, have you ever been involved in the process of the translation of your work? And have you ever been told by this translator how useful your input was or how confusing and counterproductive it was? Have you ever experienced translation in that way?
I've never collaborated.
Never.
I've sometimes come in at a later stage to talk about, but first of all I have to confess to you that with the exception of French, I couldn't actually participate on the right. I mean, I don't know, I can't read Russian or German. I'm not a linguist. So one's always circling the problem with a translator so that between you might arrive at what's right. But I tell you, you know, I did, I mentioned earlier that I did, that I've made English versions of 3 Chekhov plays. One of them is Seagull. There are many translations of the Seagull in English. And if you sit down to translate it, the first question is the. When you translate this play, is it called Seagull or is it called the Seagull? That, you know, that's how you begin. And you think, well, if that itself is a problem, what about everything that comes after that? Even when there is, you know, suppose you're doing Les Fleurs du Mal from French, where there is a definite article and an indefinite article. You look at Les Fleurs du Mal and you think, what is the best translation of the title? Is it The Flowers of Evil, or is it Flowers of Evil? Actually, this whole notion of translation, it is like it's like the Mandelbrot set in Chaos Mathematics. The bigger your magnification, however big it gets, the complexity remains constant. On every scale, complexity remains constant. That is a nice, depressing, terrifying note to end on for a translator. On every scale, complexity is constant.
I would like to thank Sir Tom Stoppard very, very much, to thank you all. And I think what I would like to lead to is a standing ovation. So thank you very much.